Okay, so you've probably heard some talk recently about federal DEI programs. It's quite a significant shift in government policy.
It really is, and we're going to unpack that today.
Exactly. We've been looking closely at this new executive order, the one aiming to end what it describes as radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing.
That's the one. Strong wording right from the title.
Yeah. So our mission here today is pretty straightforward. We want to dive into the order itself, understand its main arguments, and figure out what it's actually trying to achieve within the federal government.
And we're focusing just on what the order says, not taking a position on it ourselves.
Absolutely. Sticking to the source material.
So what jumps out right away is, well, how direct it is. It's not subtle.
No, it's not.
It clearly states its goal is to dismantle what it labels illegal and immoral discrimination programs, referring to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So it's framing these existing programs as discriminatory from the outset.
Pretty much. It represents a fundamental rethinking, or at least a stated rethinking, of the federal government's approach here.
And it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Right. The order gives some context. It points fingers, so to speak.
It does. It specifically references Executive Order 13985 from the previous administration.
President Biden's order on advancing racial equity.
That's the one. This new order basically says that order was the starting point for all the DEI efforts it now wants to reverse. It claims that earlier order forced these programs across the government.
Like into airline safety, the military. It cites examples.
Right. And it mentions that agencies had to create these equity action plans.
Yes, the equity action plans.
And the current order asserts that when these plans became public, they revealed, and I'm quoting loosely here, immense public waste and shameful discrimination.
Strong claims. It makes you wonder what specific parts of those plans triggered that kind of assessment.
Well, the order itself doesn't list specific examples from the plans, but it uses that assessment to justify its core policy shift. A shift towards a government that, it says, is committed to serving every person with equal dignity and respect, and using taxpayer money for making America great. That's the stated rationale.
Okay, so that's the why, according to the order.
Yeah.
What about the how? How does it plan to implement this?
Well, the core is termination, ending these programs.
Who's in charge of that?
It tasks the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB Director assisted by the Attorney General, and the Director of OPM, the Office of Personnel Management.
A joint effort, then.
Yes, to coordinate ending all programs deemed discriminatory. That includes DEI, DEIA, which adds accessibility mandates, policies, preferences, the whole lot.
And it seems they're anticipating attempts to just, rename things.
Definitely. It specifically mentions assessing potential relabeling efforts. The intent seems to be a full stop, not just a rebranding.
Okay. And it goes beyond just programs, right? It touches on federal employment itself.
Absolutely. The OPM director has a specific task: review and revise federal employment practices. Think hiring, union contracts, training.
And what's the new standard supposed to be?
The order says performance reviews should reward individual initiatives, skills, performance, and hard work. Critically, it says they should not consider DEI or DEIA factors.
That's a clear shift in criteria for federal workers.
A very clear shift. Merit, as defined here, excludes those factors.
Now, you mentioned a timeline earlier. There's a 60-day window for agencies.
Yes, a 60-day clock starts ticking for agency heads. They have a pretty hefty to-do list.
What are the big items?
Okay, so first, terminate to the maximum extent allowed by law all DEI, DEIA, and also environmental justice offices and positions.
Environmental justice, too. Interesting inclusion.
Yes. That includes chief diversity officers, getting rid of the equity action plans, stopping any equity initiatives, grants, contracts related to this stuff, and even DEI performance requirements.
Wow, that's sweeping. Within 60 days.
It is. And it's not just about stopping things. There's a big information gathering piece, too.
Reporting back.
Exactly. Within that same 60 days, agencies have to give the OMB director a full inventory.
An inventory of what?
All the DEI, DEIA, environmental justice positions, committees, programs, budgets, expenditures, basically, everything as it stood on November 4th, 2024.
A snapshot just before.
Okay. And importantly, that assessment of any potential relabeling efforts we talked about.
Got it. Anything else in that inventory?
Yes. They also need to list federal contractors who provided DEI training and federal grantees who got money to advance DEI or similar programs since January 20th, 2021.
Pinpointing the start of the previous administration again, so understanding the scope and cost.
Precisely. And the deputy agency heads get a specific assignment related to this.
Okay, what do the deputies have to do?
They need to assess the operational impact, like how many new DEI hires there were and the actual cost of all these programs from the prior administration.
So a sort of retrospective cost-benefit analysis, but framed negatively.
You could see it that way. And they also need to recommend actions to bring everything the agency does, policies, regulations, contracts, even how they handle lawsuits, into line with this new policy of equal dignity and respect.
That sounds like a massive internal review.
It really does. And there's even a mention of potentially needing to notify Congress about some changes under a specific law.
Suggesting they anticipate some significant shifts might require legislative awareness.
Possibly, yes. And to make sure this all happens, there's a mechanism for follow-up.
Accountability.
Looks like it. Monthly meetings are mandated.
Who attends these?
The Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy convenes them. Attending are the OMB Director, the OPM Director, and crucially, each of those deputy agency heads who are doing the assessments.
And the point of these meetings?
To hear reports on how widespread and costly these DEI-type programs were, discuss any problems agencies are having complying with the new order, and generally track progress, making sure it gets done.
So ongoing oversight from the White House level.
That's what it looks like, yes.
Okay. And then there are the usual final clauses in these orders, right? Severability and general provisions.
Standard stuff, mostly. The severability clause just means if a court strikes down one part of the order, the rest is intended to stay in effect.
Makes sense. And the general provisions.
They clarify the order doesn't override existing laws or authorities, depends on funding being available, and this is typical, doesn't create any new rights that someone could sue the government over.
Right. You can't take the order to court and say it gives you a personal claim.
Exactly. It's directing the internal workings of the government.
So let's pull this all together. We're looking at an executive order that sets out quite explicitly to dismantle DEI, DEIA, and related programs like environmental justice initiatives across the federal government.
Correct. It does this based on a stated principle of equal dignity and respect and efficient use of taxpayer money.
And it frames the programs it's ending as discriminatory, immoral, and wasteful, directly linking them to the previous administration's policies.
That's the core argument presented in the text, yes.
So, for you listening, especially if you're navigating your career or just interested in how government works, this is kind of a big deal.
It really is. It signals a potentially major change in how the federal government approaches diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, these concepts that have become quite prominent.
And those shifts could ripple outwards, couldn't they? Affecting wider discussions, maybe even priorities in other sectors that interact with the government?
It's definitely possible. Policy shifts at this level often have broader implications.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. As the federal government pivots its approach like this, what does equal opportunity actually look like in practice going forward?
Yeah, and maybe how might this specific order reshape not just what the government does, but how we all talk about fairness, access, and the government's role in those areas.
Something to keep an eye on and think about as these changes potentially start to roll out.